I think
I don't have a good ear.
it sounds fun. It's a two. So yeah, let's why don't we start with I'd like to do an improvisation to start, and maybe you'll give me a few random notes and I'll do something with it. So let's give me a note, please. Anybody? A random note.
B.
Okay, B, very good. Another one?
Was that a B?
Yeah. Anybody? Couple more.
T.
T. Yeah, well, T is the same.
Sorry.
It's also, oh no, it's okay.
I'm doing Sound of Music.
G. Okay. Couple more. F. E. Okay. Okay, let's do that. Let's use that. Any style requests? Or hello. Come on in. Or just see what happens. Maybe we'll just see what happens. So that's the melody that you composed, and I have to do something with it. So no, it's a nice melody. Okay, here.
Very nice.
Thank you. Just a little introduction. Some of these you've probably heard me do before because two things. One is I wish I could learn faster, but if I did learn faster, I wouldn't have the time to smell the roses, if you will, with each piece. I have to live with a piece to get it, I think. You never really get it, but you live with it. So the one of the big pieces I'm working on now, which I've done parts of for you, is the Beethoven Violin Concerto, but in Beethoven's piano arrangement. And I'm going to do the second movement to start today. And the reason Beethoven rewrote it as a piano piece is because the first performance on violin didn't go so well. People fell asleep. It wasn't a good, the electricity wasn't there. Beethoven was upset about that. He rewrote the piece. But here's the thing. It's, generally speaking, a very quiet and meditative piece. And that may not be what people were expecting from Beethoven. It's not what we would expect from Beethoven. But the reason that it's that way is to know this fact, what was going on in his life at the time. He was losing his hearing, and he knew it. And so I think it's a piece about philosophical acceptance. And it's not just a quiet, meditative piece. There's something really painful underneath it. And I think we can all relate to that, because for every human being, there are things in our life that we have to grapple with. It may not be as extreme as what Beethoven had, losing his hearing, but things, and then we can find somehow inner peace and acceptance. I think Beethoven's a composer of quiet hope, especially this music. There's always hope in Beethoven. He was a product of the Enlightenment, after all. And throughout all the disappointments in his life, losing his hearing, becoming, for example, disillusioned politically with Napoleon. He first supported him, and then Napoleon invaded Austro-Hungary. He hated him. But Beethoven always found resilience and hope, and I think you hear it in this. So this is the second movement of the violin concerto, but in Beethoven's own piano arrangement. 1806 is the year of this. Yeah, the good old days. I'm just kidding. Beethoven has this seriousness. He just grabs you no matter what he does. Some people have compared his music, especially like the movement like that, to something out of ancient Greek tragedy or something, or a dialogue between, because it just has that weight to it. It has that feeling of that seriousness. Because he was maybe the first composer to view himself not as a servant, but as an artist, an independent musician. You look at people like, say, Bach or Haydn, they worked for the church or the court, respectively. Beethoven did not. He was his own, agent, if you will. So now I'm going to play some other short violin-related pieces. This is a Tchaikovsky melody in E-flat major. It's a beautiful piece. And, if Beethoven didn't really write very memorable tunes, you could say, it's other things are memorable about Beethoven. Like that there's no real tune there, melody. It's just. Leonard Bernstein said Beethoven didn't write memorable tunes, but what he did with these short musical ideas, he turned them into something magical. That's how he said it. But Tchaikovsky was more like Mozart in the sense that the melody just flows right out of him. I always think of ballet music in any Tchaikovsky. This is not from a ballet, but it sounds like it could be. And finally, he was Russian. And there's something Russian sounding about it, although his fellow Russian composers like Mussorgsky, Borodin, they didn't think he was Russian enough because those guys used more folk music. But it's all these, these arguments that people have. In the music world, a lot of these guys sort of hated each other. Do you know Brahms and Tchaikovsky hated each other, for example? Yeah, they hated, I forget what, Brahms said something that Tchaikovsky was just like, I don't know, like an angsty teenager or something. But and then Tchaikovsky said that Brahms's music was dried up, old, dusty stuff. And then in their older age, they met somewhere in Vienna and they had a few drinks and then they liked each other. So, but it's just funny to read composers' opinions of each other, composers that we will love. And in some ways, Brahms and Tchaikovsky, to me, the spirit of their music is sort of similar in a way, but maybe it's the people who are most alike who will often hate each other the most. But anyway, here it is, a Tchaikovsky melody in E-flat major. It's a violin piece originally, but this is, of course, a piano version of it. I'm gonna get my watch because sometimes I don't want to run over too much, overstay my welcome. Here it is.
I don't need to understand.
Okay, well, I mean, you never. I don't want to get in trouble. It's still cold, you know. But they'll warm up. Is it cold in here?
No, it is.
Oh, it is. Well, it's just cold everywhere. I mean, this morning it was like 20 degrees.
Yeah.
Wind chill for the walk.
And then the
14.
wind chill.
Yeah.
My
14.
walk was 14.
Yuck. Here's a piece, yeah, and actually I have this sort of, I love the short salon pieces. That's sort of in a salon style. It's an off-the-cuff 19th century genre, you could say, with a little humor to it. This is a piece called La Cinquantaine, the 50th anniversary by Jean-Gabriel Marie. One of these pieces, it's not played very much anymore. They used to play these in the 19th century, early 20th century. You could hear recordings of people like Misha Elman or Fritz Kreisler. You know, they played these pieces a lot. It has a charm to it. And when I play this, you know, it's almost like laughter and tears at the same time, that state of being. Because there's a little humor to it, but there's a nostalgia there too. And I'm imagining when I play this, a couple celebrating their 50th anniversary, reminiscing, happy memories, sad memories, all mixed up together. So it has that quality to it. Jean-Gabriel Marie, the 50th anniversary. It's from a set of pieces called The Golden Wedding. I'm not sure why it's golden, but that's just what it's called. Another piece in a similar vein, in that kind of, it's, I guess the word is charm or off the cuff or something. It's not, I love this style of music, and you can hear it in recordings. And I mentioned Fritz Kreisler, so I'll play you a piece by Fritz Kreisler. This is called Viennese Caprice. And by the way, caprice is something, it's capricious. It's just, it's not too serious. It's a little fun, but there's some serious moments there too. It's both. It's a mix. I always like to say that, comedy is not always laughing matter. In other words, I like the Greeks thought that the comic playwrights were more profound than the tragic ones. And if you watch a Mozart opera, most of them are comic, but they will make you feel sad and at the same time, or Charlie Chaplin or something like that. So in other words, comedy is not just superficial ha-ha-has. That's what I believe. And Kreisler was quite a personality. He was from Vienna, obviously, and he was thoroughly Viennese. Actually, a lot of the great composers, they lived in Vienna, but they weren't from there. Like Beethoven was born in Bonn, Hamburg. Brahms was from Hamburg. Even Mozart was from Salzburg, not Vienna. Kreisler was from Vienna. So we talked about Beethoven. Here's a way to think of German composers versus, like Beethoven, Brahms, versus Viennese composers like Schubert or Kreisler or even Mahler. There's an old 19th century joke which I like to tell, which is that, what's the difference between things in Berlin and things in Vienna? So here it is. In Berlin, I'm thinking of German like Beethoven. Things are very serious, but there's always hope. And that's Beethoven. That's what I feel that piece I played is. It's very serious and very earnest, but there's always hope. In Vienna, things are not so serious, but there's no hope. And that's, unfortunately, Vienna was, I hate to say this, it's a wonderful place, but there's a dark side to Vienna's history, because in the mid-20th century, early to mid, it descended into fascism and anti-Semitism, and Kreisler and his family were Jewish. They got out, luckily, they came to America, but many were not so lucky. Actually, Kreisler performed all over in this country. I played somewhere and a lady came to me, she said, this was a couple days ago, I heard Fritz Kreisler. I was a little girl, but I heard him perform and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget his little mustache and his smile and the way he played. So, and you can hear his recordings. Kreisler's on YouTube. I reckon if you need something to give you a smile, to lift you up, listen to Kreisler. You won't regret it. He has a sunny sound. But what I mean by that, things are not so serious, but there's no hope. There's a kind of fatalism in Viennese music and culture. Somebody put it this way, that with the horrible things in the 30s and 40s, that Vienna, I think it was a historian, he said Vienna is all about the waltz, right? This piece is actually a waltz. The waltz is everything in Vienna. The Johann Strauss, Blue Danube, that's typical Vienna. But he said that the Vienna is a culture that waltzed right off of a cliff into an abyss. And that's, at that time. Vienna right now, I hear, is a great place to go. So that's talking about the time that Kreisler was there, early 20th century. But this is the Viennese Caprice, Caprice Viennois by Fritz Kreisler. Also a violin piece. I'm pretending to be a violinist. I told you, I'm too lazy to learn how to play the violin. So I stick to what I know, but I'm playing these arrangements. They're out there. ending's unexpected. Thank you. Let's see, maybe I'm still cold. My hands are a little cold. This might warm up my fingers. I'm going to play Paganini's 24th Violin Caprice, arranged by Liszt. This is very, very wild. Paganini was wild. People thought he was possessed at the time. Now, he lived in the early 19th century. I'm jumping around. That was 20th century, early 20th century. This is back to the early 19th century. Now, Paganini was sort of a prototype or inspiration for the Romantics, because he came around the time of Beethoven, and what he did was sui generis. I mean, he was like a rock star of that time almost. And both he and Beethoven were just iconoclastic. And the Romantics saw themselves in these guys, and they wanted to emulate them. And one of the first things Liszt did, which is what I'm going to play, is, he heard Paganini as a young man. He was floored by it. And he just locked himself up to practice incessantly for a few years. And in that period, he arranged some of Paganini's violin music for the piano to translate what Paganini did on the violin to this instrument. So let's do that. Maybe that'll warm up my cold fingers. So, yeah. Yeah, maybe
Wow.
maybe that warmed up a little bit. I need to get my inner heater going. Yeah, that's not easy. The list doesn't make it easy. So, yeah. So I'm going to do now some more heavy stuff before going to some not so heavy stuff. This is from the Franck Violin Sonata, which is the Beethoven thing and the Franck. These are the big pieces I'm just grappling with. By the time I'm here next month, I have a whole bunch of new pieces that are like almost ready, but not quite for today, so I promise you'll hear the last movement of the Beethoven and possibly of the Franck. But I'm going to play the third movement of the Franck. And Franck was this interesting figure. He was a Belgian-born French composer. For most of his life, he was a church organist. And that infuses that feeling of church music, church organ music. I think it infuses everything he wrote. And he was sort of the opposite of Mozart. He was not a prodigy. He was a late bloomer. He wrote everything in his later years. And I love stories like that because we always talk about the child prodigies, but there's so many in music and other fields that they blossomed later, like Bruckner, for example, composer. He wrote all his symphonies pretty much, I think, starting at like 65, 70 on. And so it just goes to my quote, which is youth is overrated. But that's another story for another day. I love that story about Franck. Although his creative blooming, if you will, it got him in a bit of trouble with his wife. I may have told you this story that there was a concert of some of his music, and you'll see it's very intense music that he writes. Somebody described it as a sermon in sound, because it has that organ, that church organ feel to it. And it's not necessarily easy listening to Franck. It's quite heavy, it's quite rich music. His wife heard the music at a concert, and she confronted him after. She said, "We've been married for many years, and this is a whole side of you that I've never, I didn't know this was in you. So what's going on here?" She was not thrilled. I thought that was funny. So here's the third movement, which is called a recitative. A recitative is like a improvisation. So in opera, when you have the singer semi-speaking the lines, that's called recitative. Semi-spoken, semi-sung. And at least the first couple pages, it really sounds like an organ improvisation to me. There's a practical thing with improvising for organists. If you're a church organist and there's communion, especially if it's a large church, you have to improvise until everyone has taken communion. So I think that's where this comes from. That's how I imagine it. So the third movement of the Franck Violin Sonata, solo piano version by Alfred Cortot. And I always tell the stupid joke that it's the Frank Sonata, not Frank Sinatra, but it sounds like the Franck, F-R-A-N-C-K. César Franck. So here it is. that I'm going to do the second movement, which is very intense. So I'll play it. Maybe you can see why his wife was. Imagine your significant other. You've known them to be a humble person or quiet, reserved, and then they write that. I don't know. I just think about that. So the second movement is very, very intense. So good luck to all of us. Okay. It's wild music. So let's see. I see the time. So I'm going to play some Southern gospel for you to close. I always like to do that. Yeah, I told you, Franck is it's heavy stuff. It's like the French and the Belgians. They cook a lot with butter. That's, a rich thing. So, but it's great music. It's just powerful stuff. So I'm going to play. This is an old time country gospel thing. It's called "Will There Be Any Stars in My Crown?" It's one of those that they're no longer putting them in the hymnals. I don't know why. You can find these in the old Cokesbury books. There's I like movies. I like old movies. So there's an old 1950 movie with the title "Will There Be Any Stars in My Crown?" It's a western, free on YouTube. There's a lot of good things. One can get a pretty good film and musical education through YouTube. Maybe not medical, but and then there's cat videos too. So anyways, yeah. So here's "Will There Be Any Stars in My Crown?" Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks. I'll do one last one. This is going to combine two styles of Southern gospel. One is, it's Will There, not Will There, that's the last one. When They Ring Those Golden Bells, an old Southern gospel number. And I'm going to play it one time through in the style of Tennessee Ernie Ford, how he would sing it. And then another in the style of Jerry Lee Lewis, Mickey Gilley, those Louisiana guys. It's got a little more, different flavor, a little oomph to it. It's a little different. So Tennessee Ernie Ford almost sings it like a classical opera singer. So here it is.
Appreciate it.